Y bueno, seguimos, llegamos ya a nuestro último ponente, a nuestro gran broche de oro, el señor Klaas Smelik. Good afternoon. Sorry for my English. Klaas Smelik, lo presento también primero con unas palabras de Etty, nos va a hablar de la búsqueda de Dios en Etty y de su relevancia en las futuras generaciones. Decía Etty: toda la fuerza y el amor y toda la fe en Dios que uno posee y que ha crecido tan milagrosamente en mí en los últimos tiempos, debe estar ahí para los demás que puedan cruzarse por casualidad en nuestro camino y que lo necesiten. Klaas Smelik estudió teología, lenguas semíticas, arqueología e historia antigua en Utrecht, Ámsterdam y Leiden. Defendió su doctorado en Ámsterdam. Enseñó Antiguo Testamento y Hebreo en Utrecht, Ámsterdam y Bruselas. Historia antigua en Ámsterdam. Historia judía en Lovaina y estudios hebreos y judíos en la Universidad de Gante. Fundó el Centro de Investigación Etty y Lesum, primero en Gante y ahora en Middelburg. Editó las ediciones íntegras en holandés, inglés, francés, italiano y español de los escritos de Etty y Lesum y ha publicado como escritor o editor alrededor de 50 libros y 250 artículos sobre la Biblia hebrea, inscripciones hebreas antiguas, historia antigua, estudios judíos, antisemitismo y Etty y Lesum. Mr. Smelik, for us, it's a real pleasure to have you on this special day and to be able to listen to Etty in the voice of someone so close to her and so knowledgeable about her context and her reality. Thank you very much, Mr. Smelik. We are looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation, and I hope that my English will be a little bit clear to you. And I have the support of Marina. Yes, Marina will help us to bridge the differences between English, Spanish, and I will refrain to speak Dutch to you in order to avoid more confusion. Ladies and gentlemen, nowadays many people have moved away from believing in the existence of God. Some consider this a liberation. They see it as a way to free themselves from the domination of the church, which in their view is a cause of oppression, anxiety, and abuse. But there are also those who have done the reverse. They have taken the route from atheist to believer, often becoming rather fanatic in their newly found certainty. The exception among the new believers are those people who have no desire to break with their past and who are more interested in examining what their spiritual quest has yielded so far. They consider every result equally important. Etty Hillesum was one such person. Her quest for God holds much relevance for future generations. The honesty with which she described the various stages of her search, coupled with her consummate literary talent, inspire readers to follow her path in developing a concept of God. Some readers recognize themselves in the early stages of her search. In expressing their own feelings, Etty Hillesum expresses their feelings too. Her images are images that appeal to the reader, For instance, in this passage. There is really deep well inside me, and in it dwells God. Sometimes I'm there too, but more often stones and grit block the well, and God is buried beneath. Then he must be dug out again. Other readers' images of God is more in line with what is written in the Psalms. These readers can also find themselves in Etty Hillesum's words, as when she wrote, I delight in warmth and security, but I shall not rebel if I have to suffer cold, should you so decree. I shall follow wherever your hand leads me, and I shall try not to be afraid. It is this breadth of expression that makes Etty Hillesum's search for God so interesting for us. Readers with completely different views can find aspects of her pursuit that appeal to them. She was far ahead of her time. Indeed, her relevance to our time sometimes seems greater than to that of her own contemporaries, many of whom were not yet ready to receive her ideas. In the different stages of her search, Etty Hillesum never replaced a previous thought or previous insight with a new one. Rather, she built on everything she had gained. Every hard-won insight laid the foundation for another. In this survey, I will focus on Hillesum's use of the word God. In March 1941, when Etty Hillesum became a client in his psychotherapy practice, psychogeologist Julius Speer advised her to begin a diary. Over time, as her spiritual quest flourished, her diary changed from a therapeutic instrument into a conversation with God. When we look at the number of passages in the diary in which Etty Hillesum speaks directly to God, it is striking that more of these passages are found in the 10th and 11th notebook rather than in the preceding ones. In the first notebook, for example, the word God occurs only 3 times in direct address. But in the 10th, God is addressed 40 times, and in the 11th, even 59 times. A passage in which Etty Hillesum passes smoothly from a literary description of what she has observed to a conversation with God is the following entry you have heard just before. The jasmine behind my house has been completely ruined by the rains and storms of the last few days. Its white blossoms are floating about in muddy black pools on the low garage roof. But somewhere inside me, the jasmine continues to blossom undisturbed, just as profusely and delicately as ever it did. And it spreads its scent around the house in which you dwell, my God. You can see, I look after you. I bring you not only my tears and my forebodings in this stormy, grey Sunday morning, I even bring you scented jasmine. And I shall bring you all the flowers I shall meet on my way, and truly there are many of those. I shall try to make you at home always, even if I should be locked up in a narrow cell and a cloud should drift past my small barred window. Then I shall bring you that cloud. O God, while there is still the strength in me to do so. I cannot promise you anything for tomorrow, but my intentions are good, you can see. In these and other passages, Etty writes about my God and speaks directly to him. Even in a superficial reading of the diaries, it is striking to note that not all occurrences of the word God have the same meaning. Let's look at a few selections from her writings to understand how she modifies this word over time and what God means to her as she undergoes her own religious transformation. I'll start with the use of the word God in the early diaries. Knowing that Hilsum revered Rainer Maria Rilke, we see that in the early notebooks, Hilsum's use of the word God imitates Rilke's stylistic choice employed especially in his poetic cycle Das Stundenbuch, the Book of Hours. In these poems, Rilke speaks to God as if he were speaking to himself, because in fact, Rilke considered God as enclosed within himself and not a transcendent personality. One even wonders whether Rilke's use of the name God was not merely a literary device for better illustrating his own ideas. In Rilke's case, the term God has no meaning beyond the literary horizon of his work. The same applies to the way in which Etty introduces God in early passages in her diaries, to wit, as an imaginary figure to whom she could speak because doing so made it easier for her to articulate her thoughts. This is evident in the following passage. When I pray, I never pray for myself, always for others, or else I hold a silly, naive, and deadly serious dialogue with what is deepest inside me, which, for the sake of convenience, I call God. In this way, prayer is nothing more for Hilsum than talking to herself, but she ultimately kneels down to pray. Why did she adopt from Speer a ritual that he had borrowed from Christianity? Why did she kneel as if she were a Roman Catholic? Is it not a superfluous gesture when speaking to oneself? She wrote the following about this when she was reflecting on Speer's death a month earlier. I think that I can bear everything life, and these times have in store. Sorry, I think I can bear everything life and these times have in store for me. And when the turmoil becomes too great and I'm completely at my wits' end, then I shall have my folded hands and bended knee. A posture that's not handed down from generation to generation with us Jews. I've had to learn it in the hard way. It is my most precious inheritance from the man whose name I have almost forgotten, but whose best part has become a constituent of my own life. What a strange story! It really is my story. The girl who could not kneel, or in its variation, the girl who learned to pray. That's my most intimate gesture, more intimate even than being with a man. For Etty needing to pray initiated a process that led to God being given greater meaning in her writings. It does, however, remain impossible to assign a strictly chronological demarcation to this evolution. We can approach this development by considering the difference between God's transcendence and his immanence, to use theological terms. The Bible portrays a God apart from mankind's world, a God enthroned in heaven, a transcendent God. This God of Israel is clearly a person with a clear-cut character and is not an intangible like the ultimate good or the intelligent designer, as some people picture God today. The biblical God is a personal God. He is not to be found within a human being. Before him, man is merely dust and ashes. But in defiance of this fundamental inequality of the respective positions, God is living with us in a special I-thou relationship, to quote the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. In contrast, an immanent God is the representation of God as the deepest part of the human person. Etty puts it in this way: my love of life is so great and so strong and calm, and makes me so grateful that I shall refrain from putting it into words again. There is such perfect and complete happiness in me, O God. What he called reposing in oneself, and that probably best expresses my own love of life. I repose in myself. And that part of myself, that deepest and richest part in which I repose, is what I call God. Here at Hillesum uses unambiguous language. Her God is not the transcendent God from the Bible who is enthroned in heaven. God is the peace she feels within herself. In the following passage, Etty even seems to want to abandon the name God. I'm only at the beginning, but the beginning is there. That much I know for certain. It means gathering together all the strength one can, living our life with God and in God and God in me. I find the word God so primitive at times. It's only a metaphor, after all, an approach to our greatest and most continuous inner adventure. I'm sure that I don't even need the word God, which sometimes strikes me as a primitive, primordial sound, a makeshift construction. And at night, when I sometimes have the inclination to speak to God and say very childishly, God, things just can't go on like this with me. And sometimes my prayer can be very desperate and imploring. It is nevertheless as if I were addressing something in myself, trying to plead with a part of myself. The parenthetical comment, I'm sure that I don't even need the word God, which sometimes strikes me as a primitive primordial sound, a makeshift construction, goes further than Hillesum's previous definition of God as what is the deepest inside me, which for the sake of convenience I call God. When she designates God as a makeshift construction, she comes full circle back to Rilke's use of the word God in his Stundenbuch. Yet, Etty seems to assume that when she speaks to God, she is not addressing a part of herself. She writes, it is nevertheless as if I were addressing something in myself. As if. is key here. Her words to God look like she is addressing herself, but she knows that's not the way it is or should be. God is distinct from her, and there's an unexpressed expectation that the description she chooses early in this passage, living one's life with God and in God and God in me, is for her the more consistent way to think of God. In this sense, God is greater than a makeshift construction or a literary device. Then, ladies and gentlemen, what is God for Etty Hillesum? Is God the deepest part of her own person, or is he something from outside that has taken root within her? There is a major difference between these two concepts. In the first case, the deepest part of a person is divine. In the second, God, as a unique character, chooses to dwell in the individual. Hillesum's preceding passage just quoted seems to point to the first option. Other passages, however, clearly show that at Hillesum visualized God as taking up residence in the person, moving within the body from the head to the heart. This notion appears in a passage from a letter to a friend. The cosmos has moved from my head to my heart, or in my particular case, to my midriff. Anyway, from my head to another area. And once God has moved inside me to the space in which he still resides, well, I suddenly stopped having headaches and stomach aches. But Etty Hillesum's seemingly ready access to God was not her fundamental condition. She had to dig him out, and initially she needed Julius Speer's help in this internal spiritual excavation. In a letter written shortly before Speer's death, she describes it like this. The great work Speer has done on me, he has dug up God in me and brought him to life. And I shall now go on digging and seeking God in all the human hearts I meet, no matter where on earth that may be. Digging up God in the hearts of others became a major theme in Etty Hillesum's writings. She saw it as her most important task at Camp Westerbork. A week later, she wrote in her diary, and that's when my task begins. It's not enough simply to proclaim you, God, to commend you to the hearts of others. One must also clear the path towards you in them, God. And to do that, one has to be a keen judge of the human soul, a trained psychologist. Sometimes people seem to me like houses with open doors. I walk in and roam through passages and rooms, and every house is furnished a little differently, and yet they are all of them the same, and everyone must be turned into a dwelling dedicated to you, O God. And I promise you, yes, I promise, that I shall try to find a dwelling and a refuge for you in as many houses as possible. When Etty Hillesum promises God she would find a home for him, she spoke to him as to a person facing her, thus in the biblical sense. In this way, she steps over the boundary between an immanent and a transcendent God. This is already palpable in an earlier diary entry. Many accuse me of indifference and passivity when I refuse to go into hiding. They say that I have given up. They say everyone who can must try to stay out of their clutches. It's our bounden duty to try. And the funny thing is, I don't feel I'm in their clutches anyway, whether I stay or when I am sent away. I find all that talk so cliche-ridden and naive, and can't go along with it anymore. I don't feel in anybody's clutches. I feel safe in God's arms, to put it rhetorically, and no matter whether I'm sitting at this beloved old desk now, or in a bare room in the Jewish district, or perhaps in a labor camp under SS guards in a month's time, I shall always feel safe in God's arms. Here, Etty expresses the feeling that she was in God's arms rather than in the clothes of the Nazis. This stands in stark contrast to the metaphor used elsewhere, where God dwells within her. In this text, she pictures God as the one who takes her in his protective arms. Is this a metaphor? Or is it an expression of a sense of security and warmth in the presence of God who exists outside her? In this and other passages, God is a being in whose arms Etty rests and whose hand she willingly follows. Beside the image of God dwelling within her, Etty had another way of writing about God when she envisioned a God reminiscent of the biblical God. But to what extent does Etty model her own view of God on the biblical God? On one point, Etty is on the same wavelength as the biblical authors. God is the creator of heaven and earth. We find this explicitly expressed in the following passage from a letter written in Kamp Westerbork. You have made me so rich, O God. Please let me share out your beauty with open hands. My life has become an uninterrupted dialogue with you, O God, one great dialogue. Sometimes when I stand in some corner of the camp, my feet planted on your earth, my eyes raised towards your heaven, tears sometimes run down my face, tears of deep emotion and gratitude. At night, too, when I lie in my bed and rest in you, O God, tears of gratitude run down my face, and that's my prayer. In Etty writings, we see the characteristic Jewish view that the creation is good. She praises God's creation, despite all that people do to one another. She adopts the biblical view that mankind is created in God's image, and he's present even in God's image and likeness. Even people who kill one another in war are made in God's image, and he is present even in them. Despite the war's descent into the madness of Nazism, she persists in praising God's creation. This is evident in the following entry. It is sometimes hard to take in and comprehend, O God, what those created in your likeness do to each other in these disjointed days. But I no longer shut myself away in my room, O God. I try to look things straight in the face, even the worst crimes, and to discover the small, naked human being amid the monstrous wreckage caused by man's senseless deeds. I don't sit here in my peaceful, flower-filled room, praising you through your poets and thinkers. That would be too simple, and in any case, I'm not as unworldly as my friends so kindly think. Every human being has his own reality. I know that, but I'm no fanciful visionary God, no schoolgirl with a beautiful soul. I try to face up to your world, God, not to escape from reality into beautiful dreams, though I believe that beautiful dreams can exist besides the most horrible reality. And I continue to praise your creation, God, despite everything. Etty Hillesum reflects here the typical Jewish optimism that had given her people the strength to endure 2,000 years of persecution and hardship. She was aware that the German occupier was intent on destroying European Jewry, yet she continued to believe in God and in the beauty of life. In her diary, she writes, with each minute that passes, I shed more wishes and desires and attachments. I'm ready for everything, for anywhere on this earth, wherever God may send me. And I'm ready to bear witness in any situation and unto death that life is beautiful and meaningful, and that it's not God's fault that things are as they are at present, but our own. But, ladies and gentlemen, why was it not God's fault that in 1942 his creation was so derailed that the whole world was fighting, robbing, and murdering? As we have seen in Etty Hillesum's view, God is the creator of heaven and earth, as the Bible proclaims. But according to Christian tradition, another aspect of God should be added. God is Almighty. As in the Apostles' Creed, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. But God is not Almighty for Etty Hillesum. He cannot alter the conditions of life, nor can he rescue us from evil. This task is placed squarely on the shoulders of humanity. Moreover, people have to defend God's dwelling place, which lies inside them. In this respect, people have to help God. This doesn't mean that God is helpless. He will comfort us when we are overwhelmed by grief and sorrow. He will not abandon us, but he cannot alter our fate. Therefore, God's creation is and will remain good, and life, taken generally, is good, despite war and persecution. In a letter to her friend Han Wegerif, Etty Hillesum puts it in this way. And in spite of everything, you always end up with the same conviction: life is good after all. It isn't God's fault that things go awry sometimes. The cause lies in ourselves. And that's what stays with me, even now, even when I'm about to be packed off to Poland with my whole family. The atrocities happening on earth, these are the work of human hands. God bears no blame for the outrages humans commit. And thus people cannot look to an almighty God to solve their problems. They have to act on their own. And later they have to justify their deeds before their Creator. Etty says, "Neither do I hold you responsible, although you may later hold us responsible." She emphatically reiterates this twice in the following passage in her diary. God is not accountable to us, but we are to Him. I know what may lie in wait for us. The latest news is that all Jews will be transported out of Holland through Drenthe province and then on to Poland. And the English radio has reported that 700,000 Jews perished last year alone in Germany and the occupied territories. And even if we stay alive, we shall carry the wounds with us throughout our lives. And yet, I don't think that life is meaningless. And God is not accountable to us for the senseless harm we cause one another. We are accountable to Him. I have already died 1,000 deaths in 1,000 concentration camps. I know about everything, and I am not longer appalled by the latest reports. In one way or another, I know it all, and yet I find life beautiful and meaningful from minute to minute. Even in the midst of the horrors of the Shoah, Etty was able to clearly answer the question, why didn't God intervene when the Nazis were persecuting and exterminating His people? While others consider God responsible for the war crimes that people committed, Etty demarcated the matter unambiguously. People are responsible for what they do. God has nothing to do with it. The question is not, where was God during the Shoah? The question is, where were the human bystanders during the persecution of the Jewish people? That's a variation on God's question to Adam in Genesis chapter 3, verse 9. Where art thou? And his question to Cain in Genesis 4th chapter, verse 9. Where is Abel thy brother? We must first ask ourselves why people perpetrated these incomparable crimes, and then why did others let them happen? Even though Hillesum's image of God as needing human help and protection is difficult to square with the biblical image of God as Redeemer, her assertion that God may call people to account for their deeds in all circumstances is indisputable biblical. Its corollary is her belief that God will not abandon anyone, no matter where they may be. In conclusion, 2 points stand out when it comes to the image Etty Hillesum formed of God. First, Etty Hillesum had a multifaceted image of God, combining the idea of God as the innermost part of a person with the biblical vision of God as an entity standing outside a person. This is a way of thinking about God that many people find attractive. The theological concept of an immanent God simply and harmoniously conjoined with that of a transcendent God. Her intimate relationship with God, whether he is the deepest part within her, has taken up residence within her, or is a person facing her, all inspire readers to find their own way to God. Second, there is some notion that even though God is not almighty, he can nevertheless call us to account for our deeds is intriguing. It immediately eliminates a series of dead-end questions that presuppose that God can prevent people from doing wrong. Asking questions like why God permits genocide or exploitation works to deny human responsibility for one's own actions and for the actions of others. Moreover, such questions obscure our vision of God. What Etty Hillesum has done in her diary is to bring us out of the darkness of human behavior and back to the light of God's presence. Notwithstanding the very difficult circumstances in which he lived, Etty Hillesum held firmly to her creed, I believe in God and I believe in man. Thanks to her fortunate decision to entrust her diaries to my father, Klaas Smelik, people around the world have become acquainted with her creed. The diaries have fulfilled her wish to be of benefit to posterity. What she wrote during the war is still relevant for us today, 80 years later. I would even argue that her ideas are more relevant now than ever. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Ahora, si alguien quiere hacer alguna pregunta a Klaas, por favor que levante la mano. Le vamos habilitando el micrófono y se la puede hacer directamente en inglés. ¿Ok?
I have one question.
Ok.
Klaas,
Yes,
imagine,
Marina.
imagine Etty were alive now. Just imagine. What opinion will he have of the Jewish people now? Do you think she will have the same opinion as she did? I know it's it's an impossible question because she's not alive. But
Yeah.
if she saw what the Jewish people are doing now, what in your belief, what will she think about it?
Yes, maybe we have a different opinion on the present situation. You were talking about the Jewish people, but I think you mean the Israeli government.
No, I
That's
mean
not the same.
no, sorry, I mean the Jewish people, as the concept of the Jewish people.
Yes, she always has felt herself as part of the people, and she even was prepared to die for it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, but the hatreds we see now in the world will be a very big disappointment for would be a very big disappointment to her, because she has hoped that after the war people would think all these atrocities, think it over, and start to build a new world, a world based on love instead of hatred. And I must say that during my life, we have had periods of hope that the situation would be better, and also the situation of the Jewish people would be better, and that anti-Semitism would be something from the past. And I must confess that I'm also very disappointed that now the situation has changed so bitterly, and that anti-Semitism is rising again everywhere in the world, also here in Belgium and Holland, and that people are promoting hatred everywhere, thinking about complots, spreading all kinds of very nasty remarks in the internet, in the social media. So it seems that we are returning to the situation in the 1930s, at the eve of the Second World War, and that all the thoughts, all the writings, all the actions of people to promote peace and love and kindness, that they seem in vain for some reason or another. And this is something that amazes me too. Why has it changed the last, let's say, 20 years so much? Yes, that's a question that we have to ask ourselves. Why did it change? Where did it change? And there's a lot to think about
Mm-hmm.
and to write about.
Ana quiere preguntar.
I would like, first of all, to thank you for this sharing with us. This has been so beautiful and profound, so deep, that listen to you for us is very emotional, because you're very, very near to Etty. And only this thing is really very, very important for us, no? What I would like to ask you is, I would like to read again what you have shared with us, but I would like to ask you, what do you think, or how is the gospel? No, Etty read a lot to St. Matthew's gospel.
Yeah.
So sometimes I would like to know because Etty didn't talk about Jesus, he didn't
No.
talk to Jesus, no word of Jesus, but she lived the message of Jesus.
Yeah.
So what do you think of she's, if she's near not to the Christianism, to Jesus? How, if you can say something of this?
Yes. So it is important to note that when she speaks about St. Paul, she doesn't write St. Paul or Paul, but she said the Jew Paul. So when she is reading the New Testament, she's reading it out being a Jewess in the Jewish tradition. So for her, it is natural to make a distinction between the message Jesus of Nazareth brought and the Christian view on Jesus Christ. So she doesn't need the Christian view of Jesus Christ to understand his words. You see? So
Yes,
the
yes.
whole Christian interpretation of the Jesus actions, Jesus' word, and the Gospels is for her unnecessary. So she's could say Jesus is her brother. She doesn't need people from outside to understand him.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much.